I'd like to start us off today and welcome everybody. Welcome to the second of our O&M webinar series. Thank you for filling in the poll results. We'll be getting started shortly. Please take a moment to select your preferred language from the box, the translation box at the bottom right hand of your screen. Welcome to the second installment of this Pro-Wash Operation and Maintenance of Wash Infrastructure webinar series. Special welcome to those French speakers who are tuning in today. Welcome to all of you. And as I've said before, but to those who've just joined us, please select your preferred language from the bottom right of the screen, English or French. Just to introduce this webinar series, during the series, we'll be sharing lessons learned from USAID partners, focusing on innovative advances in approaches to operation and maintenance of water, sanitation and hygiene infrastructure, WASH infrastructure. And our speakers will discuss their program's approaches to engineering, environmental, financial and political economy challenges, and aim to draw out important lessons that are more widely applicable. My name is Jude Cobbing, and I'm the Senior Specialist for Water Infrastructure and Governance for Pro-Wash. Also on the line, facilitating this webinar is Nicole Weber, the Acting Director for Pro-Wash. And I'd like to thank our facilitators and translator at this stage. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, please send a chat message to Pro-Wash. That's in the chat box at the bottom of your screen to Pro-Wash, and we'll do our best to assist you. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Pro-Wash, Pro-Wash is an initiative funded by USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, the BHA, and led by Save the Children. Pro-Wash aims to provide support to implementing partners in order to strengthen the quality of WASH interventions through capacity strengthening, knowledge sharing and applied WASH research opportunities. To learn more, you can visit the FSN Network website by clicking on the link in the chat box. Just before we begin, I'd like to encourage all attendees today to please introduce yourselves in the chat box. We'd love to know your name and where you're calling from. Please note that if you have any questions during the webinar, we'd like to post your questions. We would like you to post your questions in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please don't include your questions in the chat box. All questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Any questions that we don't get to by the end of the webinar will include in a question and answer document shared on the FSN network. And that FSN site address we've put in the chat box. And so as I say, please don't hesitate to post your questions in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. And you can also upvote questions, don't forget, in the Q&A box that you'd like us to answer. So to begin, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Kevin Peterson. And Dr. Peterson is calling in from Cape Town, South Africa today. Dr. Peterson has over 25 years of experience in the water and geosciences fields. He has served as a specialist consultant to many, including the United Nations, the European Union, the World Bank, the Southern African Development Community, and the SADC Groundwater Management Institute. In 2010, Dr. Pietersen was elected as a member of the National Advisory Committee of the Minister of Water Affairs in South Africa. He was the team leader that developed the Operations and Maintenance Manual for Groundwater Infrastructure. Today, Dr. Peterson will be presenting on the new Operations and Maintenance Training Manual for Groundwater Infrastructure, developed by the Southern African Development Community, or SADC. Dr. Peterson, over to you.
Thank you, Jude, and thank you for making me form part of this webinar series. Greetings to all my friends throughout Africa and throughout the world. I trust you all are well in these uncertain times. I'm doing this presentation on behalf of the Southern African Development Groundwater Management Institute, or SADC GMI. The presentation is done on behalf of the Executive Director, Mr. James Serramba, and the Infrastructure Consultant, Mr. Kasonde Mulenge. The presentation is also done on behalf of the project team that developed the Groundwater Infrastructure Operation and Maintenance Manual. Next slide, please. Just to provide some introduction or background to the SADC GMI, the rationale for the establishment of the SADC GMI was based on the importance of groundwater in the region. The need to set up a center of excellence for groundwater management and groundwater-dependent ecosystems was felt. And this basically resulted in the establishment of the SADC GMI to facilitate national, regional, and international groundwater initiatives and also institutions. SADC GMI's core mandate is to promote sustainable groundwater management and provide solutions to groundwater management challenges across the SADC region. The SADC GMI is the implementing agency of the Sustainable Groundwater in SADC Member States project funded by the World Bank, with support of the Global Environment Facility and the Cooperation in International Waters in Africa Trust Fund. The project comprises 4 components, namely operationalizing the SADC GMI, enhancing institutional capacity of governments in SADC member states and transboundary organizations, improving availability of and access to knowledge, scientific research and data on groundwater, and lastly, to promote infrastructure solutions for sustainable groundwater management. And it's under that specific component that the operation and maintenance groundwater manual was launched or initiated. Next slide, please. The SADC GMI, under promoting infrastructure solutions for sustainable groundwater management, has initiated several pilot projects throughout the region, some of it which is listed in the slide. Here I highlight just an example. In Malawi, a typical water supply project would be groundwater exploration, siting, drilling, and equipping the boreholes to reticulate the water to communal distribution points around the community, culminating in supplying water to approximately around 15,000 inhabitants in a specific community within Malawi. And there's examples of this type of projects that has been initiated throughout SADC. And out of this then came the wish to kind of consolidate our knowledge around the operation and maintenance of groundwater infrastructure and the development of a manual that can be used across the region in terms of dealing with this specific important issue. Next slide, please. So I think it's important to highlight that groundwater infrastructure can be considered critical infrastructure as it is socially, economically, or operationally essential to the functioning of a society or community, both in routine circumstances and also in the extreme circumstances of an emergency. The provision of infrastructure services such as clean water and sanitation is essential for human health and the creation of economic welfare. However, groundwater infrastructure should not be viewed in isolation, but rather viewed as part of a system that comprises a portfolio of interlinked assets that provide essential services for society. Next slide, please. In the SADC region, there are a large variety of groundwater schemes and technologies ranging from relatively simple spring protections and hand-dug wells equipped with ropes and buckets to more sophisticated hand pumps and mechanized boreholes. At the upper level of complexity are multi-borehole schemes with storage buffers and extensive reticulation serving large areas with complex operation and maintenance characteristics. It is thus imperative that the infrastructure that brings the water to communities is always kept functional. However, it has become clear that limited accessibility to groundwater resources in most areas is more frequently a function of the functionality of the infrastructure, which was supported by numerous studies and also questionnaire that we conducted amongst member states, than the physical availability of the groundwater resource. Non-functionality of the infrastructure is also related to infrastructure vandalism, which unfortunately is prevalent throughout many countries in SADC. Next slide, please. A number of operation and maintenance challenges manifest itself within the SADC region. This includes insufficient public funding for infrastructure, annual budgets which is not suited to stable multi-year operation and maintenance needs, lack of skilled staff, no life cycle view in design and build, and no integrated budget, inappropriate system design, poor borehole drilling and technical specification, aging infrastructure, non-availability and high cost of spare parts, vandalism, as previously mentioned, weak planning, regulation and coordination, and limited involvement of stakeholders. So these were some of the critical operation and maintenance challenges that was identified by member states. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, there's been a chronic underfunding of infrastructure resulting in an infrastructure gap. To close the infrastructure gap, an important lever is to optimize existing assets through proper operation and maintenance. In this regard, SADC GMI has commissioned this training manual for operation and maintenance of groundwater infrastructure in SADC. The purpose of this training manual is to provide support for groundwater infrastructure development solutions that can improve management of small groundwater schemes throughout SADC. The target audience for the operation and maintenance manual includes water supply managers, technical staff, plant operators, and water practitioners. Next slide, please. We basically supplemented the training manual by holding a training course. The course was planned as a face-to-face training course. However, the onset of the COVID pandemic made this option not feasible. To mitigate the COVID pandemic, the training course used the CapNet virtual training platform and was both instructor-led and self-paced. And to a certain degree, the onset of the pandemic and giving us the opportunity to host it on the virtual platform makes it now much more accessible, the type of information and presentations that and learning materials that we develop part of the course. So that can now be readily made available across the region, across the world, for that matter. The first part of the training program consisted of a series of online presentations by developers of the training manual. Following the second part of the training course, which was self-paced, and the participants were expected to examine reading materials and videos in support of the presentation and exercises. The course was intended for participants to know the challenges of operation and maintenance of groundwater infrastructure in SADC, develop an understanding of the policy, legislative, and institutional frameworks necessary for operation and maintenance, comprehend the typical cost structures of groundwater supply schemes, and understand the primary cost drivers of operation and maintenance, understand what tasks are required for general operation and maintenance of the various water supply sources and groundwater monitoring infrastructure for the effective functioning, understand basics of pump operation and maintenance, understand the role of monitoring and evaluation and operation and maintenance plans in improving the operation and maintenance process. Next slide. The course also focuses on, both the course and the manual also focuses on practical skill. Because of the COVID pandemic, we had to be innovative in a sense, using group work, video demonstrations, case studies, and we planned visual demonstrations or live demonstrations, for example, of pump maintenance and so forth. But unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic, that was not possible. But when we hold up the follow-up courses, we envisage that practical demonstrations would form part of this course. For example, how to size and replace pump for an existing installation. We would, for example, give the participants result of a hydrogeologist report and details of the scheme and pumping main, as well as copies of pump catalog, but pump curves. And then basically the participants will use the information to select pumps and also develop a schedule of operation and maintenance tasks for the operator of an automated electrical submersible water pump. So that was just the type of exercises that is built in the course to kind of deal with specific scenarios or specific issues. Next slide, please. So the training manual has 15 chapters dealing with the type of groundwater infrastructure found in the SADC region, but also considers institutional and financial aspects. So obviously chapter 1 is introduction to the operation and maintenance training manual. Chapter 2 focuses on infrastructure sustainability and resilience. Chapter 3 looks at institutional arrangements of operation and maintenance. Chapter 4 focuses on financial management aspects. And then chapter 5 on financing of operation and maintenance of groundwater schemes. We also introduced non-revenue water, specifically within an urban context within groundwater supply schemes. Then we go into more the technical parts, focusing on the operation and maintenance of groundwater sources, wells and boreholes, the operation and maintenance of positive displacement pumps, hand pumps, the operation and maintenance of positive displacement pumps, rotor-stator, which is typically monopumps, and then the operation and maintenance of centrifugal submersible pumps, and then operation and maintenance of spring chambers. Chapter 12 touches on the operation and maintenance of water treatment, transmission, and storage systems up to the standby, but that was not the focus of this specific manual, and we basically just highlight some of the issues there. And then chapter 13 focuses on the operation and maintenance of groundwater monitoring infrastructure. Then the last 2 chapters focuses on monitoring and evaluation and the importance of developing an operation and maintenance plan. Next slide, please. Perhaps the most important issue is the question of funding. Now, unfortunately, I cannot deal with this with all the chapters of the manual in this presentation, so I will highlight only one or two chapters just to give you a perspective or a sense of what the chapters entails. But the chapter that focuses on financing of operation and maintenance of groundwater schemes deals with the issue of funding as without inadequate funds, the best laid operation and maintenance plans will fail. So funding is intimately tied to the legal, political, and institutional context of each country or region, and issues such as willingness to pay and existing community operation and management schemes becomes important. In general, the funding of operation and maintenance in SADC is difficult and complex for a range of reasons. Questions revolve around the proportion of costs that should be contributed by users, with the full economic costs of a scheme and its operation and maintenance considered a desirable goal in many cases by governments, but in practical implementation, not a reality. However, in many parts of SADC, water is considered a free good or a service that should be provided by the state. So there are various compromise positions between these two end members with different types of subsidies applicable under different circumstances. So in this chapter, we present the typical cost structures of groundwater supply schemes, understand the primary cost drivers of operation and maintenance, consider policy considerations for operation and maintenance, understand the various tariff models and mechanisms to finance operation and maintenance of groundwater schemes. Next slide, please. So we also focus obviously on hand pumps, because this is the pump most used for potable water supply. We also do have windmills in specifically South Africa and Namibia, which seems to be also a water supply option. But a common use example in our region includes the AfriDef, the India Mark II, and then the bush pump, which is predominantly used in Zimbabwe. As a result of the widespread reliance of communities on hand pumps for their primary water supplies and the issues around standardizations, local supply, operation, maintenance, and repair, a lot of work has been done studying the issues and providing the resources to assist people working in the field with hand pumps. So in our manual, we cross-reference to this work, especially, for example, work done by the Rural Water Supply Network, which have a lot of practical information related to the operation and maintenance of hand pumps. But basically what we try to do is understand the basics of pump operation and maintenance of hand pumps, able to troubleshoot and establish appropriate remedial action, appreciate the link between operation and maintenance and sustainability of water supply. Next slide, please. We also have a chapter that deals with the operation and maintenance of centrifugal submersible pumps. And this pump seems to be the pump or the most used motorized borehole pump in our region, in the SADC region. And there are many manufacturers and suppliers, and the pumps are made in almost all sizes that will meet the needs of any borehole installation, from small 3-inch diameter pumps for small boreholes to 12-inch diameter borehole pumps. The pump is closely coupled with a pump motor, with both having the same outside diameter, such that both can be inserted into the borehole to optimal pumping depth. But we found that this is the most common application for submersible pumps is basically run to fail, as it becomes too expensive to pull and maintain the pumps. So the kind of operating paradigm is to, especially in your deeper borehole, is basically to run the pumps to fail and then replace it at that point in time, rather than pull it on a regular basis for maintenance. But basically in this chapter, we basically attempt to understand how the pump works, identify the components of the pump, learn how to specify the correct size of the borehole application, understand the requirements of pump operation, understand the pump maintenance requirements, and also being able to troubleshoot common problems. Next slide, please. I think one lesson is, it's important to correctly size your submersible pump, and that is that we need to match a borehole well with the submersible pump that is designed for its anticipated duty. This includes the flow rate, the pumping head, and the water quality. In some cases, pump selection is an afterthought, and the main pump selection criterion may be whether the pump fit the borehole and whether it falls inside the budget. So incorrectly specified pumps fail more often and can put stress on other parts of the supply system. And this is important to recognize that bigger pumps is not always better. Bigger pumps require bigger electricity supply, larger pipes and valves, and installation equipment. The bigger the pump, the more energy is lost in pipe friction. A smaller pump running 24 hours a day is more efficient than a large pump operating for a few hours a day and costs less to purchase and maintain. And too high pumping rates can draw water level down, creating oxidizing conditions in the aquifer, which can impact water quality, leading to borehole clogging. Next slide, please. So we also talk about operation and maintenance of groundwater monitoring infrastructure, and because of the vandalism issue, people had to create technical solutions in terms of casing and special padlocks and purpose-made borehole alerts to protect the boreholes from vandalism. And we speak to those type of issues, but in the end, vandalism can only be resolved through community engagement. So we like to understand in this chapter we work on understanding the importance of groundwater monitoring, describe the monitoring infrastructure, understand the groundwater monitoring infrastructure and operation and maintenance tasks. Next slide, please. So potable and readily available water are important for public health, whether it's used for drinking, domestic use, food production, or recreational purposes. Absence or inadequate potable water supply services expose citizens to preventable health risks, including diseases such as cholera. So an effective operation and maintenance system perpetuates a vicious cycle of poverty. So our understanding is to kind of inculcate the importance of operation and maintenance and the value of effective operation and maintenance system, so that we've got a virtuous cycle. Next slide, please. So to conclude, our hope is that the training manual provides support for groundwater infrastructure solutions that can improve management of small groundwater schemes throughout SADC, reflects SADC GMI's commitment to promote sustainable groundwater management and solution to groundwater challenges in the SADC region through building capacity, providing training, advancing research, supporting infrastructure development, and enabling dialogue and exchange of groundwater information. So in terms of rollout, the intention from SADC GMI is basically to have these documents translated both French and Portuguese, and basically then to hold these similar type of workshops in the respective areas or regions. But hopefully, as operation and maintenance training is very much practically orientated, that we would soon in the near future be able to hold this hold this face to face. Thank you, Jude. I will hand over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin, for the presentation. Really interesting work that you're doing, and we're excited to now move into the question and answer component of this webinar. And just a reminder that as other questions come up, please go ahead and drop them in the Q&A box. You can ask your questions in English or in French, and we'll be happy to interpret them as we go through this part of the session. So starting off with a question that we have, do you have best practices of groundwater and infrastructure maintenance in sub-Saharan Africa? You've touched on some, but maybe you can expand a bit more.
So I wouldn't call it best practices. I will call it good practices. There are examples of situations where there's been developed training manuals and training specifications around how to maintain, operate, and maintain, for example, hand pumps. And we've got examples in Malawi, for example, on various people being trained and training manuals developed in terms of how to train area mechanics. For example, how to maintain, to operate and maintain, in this case, the AfriDef hand pump.
Thank you. Thank you for that example. The next question is, are these training manuals available, and are recordings of the trainings or the self-paced trainings accessible as well?
So yes, the manual can be requested from SADC GMI. So I think we'll put an email address to in the chat box where people can request the manual from. The training materials are all available, and I think it can be readily made available to whoever would want to use them. So it's just a matter of requesting it from SADC GMI. It's all loaded onto the CapNet virtual platform. So there's already a custom-made course which is more virtual than nature. But as I've said, operation and maintenance training should preferably be on-site training, as demonstrations are very much practically orientated. Thank you.
Great, thank you. What are you doing locally for maintenance, for example, to support youth initiative for employment promotion and job creation? So are there elements of youth engagement throughout this work?
Yeah, so that is a very important question. So depending on the nature of the scheme and the level of what do you call it, the level of infrastructure development required. If people are recruited from local communities, there's always gender and youth requirements related to how this selection of people may take place. So there's examples of how to do that.
Thank you. In light of advancement in technology, alternative energy sources such as solar power, does this manual have contents to support O&M in deep field locations and rural areas where the technical know-how could be minimal? So both looking at how can this manual be used in deep field areas with minimal technical knowledge, as well as how does it take into account advancements in technology such as solar power?
So to answer the first question, we need to understand that the manual was based on a needs assessment and customized to the SADC region specifics. Now, if you take it to another area or other scenario, you would then customize. You'll have to take that information and customize to that given situation. So it's not an off-the-shelf type type of manual. It's something that you have to customize to your given situation, because I realize from region to area, there's a lot of variation, in terms of conditions. So there's not let's call it, it's not a recipe book where you do 1 to 3. What is provided is guidance, is providing experience, is provided what we did in this situation, and hopefully people can then take that knowledge and customize it to its given situation. In terms of other technologies, we do talk about solar power and the use of solar power. We look at the cost effectiveness of it against looking at the different types of energy sources, because solar power is coupled with submersible pumps seems to be more and more the technology that is being adopted in many of the SADC countries. But with that comes also vandalism issues and how to deal with those specific challenges.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. The next question is in French. À qui s'adresse le manuel et l'enseignement? Qui a la responsabilité de la maintenance et de l'entretien et du suivi de la qualité?
So the manual in this case is meant for member states in the SADC region. It's basically aimed at water supply managers, decision makers around groundwater management and groundwater infrastructure. So those are the primary people who the manual is aimed at. So it provides a SADC-wide type of description of issues. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, that is basically the responsibility of the member states' national water departments, whether it's in the operation and maintenance directorates, but that is very specific to a country in terms of how the institutional arrangements is set up around operation and maintenance aspects.
Thank you. The next question, what is the management model of these water supply systems? Is it community-based, public, private, PPE? Or sorry, PPP, not PPE.
Yeah.
PPP.
So in the manual, we talk about the range of management options, from not so much private public partnerships, because that is more suited for big infrastructure. But we're talking about a community-based management to public-based management, and also hybrid systems in between.
Can you describe any inspiring O&M models that you have found that seem most appropriate for rural contexts?
So financing models, I can point you to the Fundi Fix model that's implied in Kenya. I think that is a good model in terms of funding operation and maintenance of groundwater infrastructure, and bringing in local communities to support the operation and maintenance, and also local people, and sharing expertise across the region. That model seems to be a good model. You've got similar models in other countries also, but what is good about that model is the kind of hybrid financing mechanism between communities and also other funders or donors to kind of support operation and maintenance of groundwater infrastructure.
Good, thank you for that example. And last year, actually, we worked with the USAID funded Sustainable Wash Systems, SWS, the Sustainable Wash Systems Learning Partnership, and we did a small group discussion with FundyFix and with them and some of our partners. And some of those who are on the line today might have actually had a chance to connect and just dig more deeper into that model. So thank you for that example. Let's see, what else do we have? There's a question just where in Malawi, and also where do you plan to organize trainings in the future?
So I'm not sure about the question of where in Malawi. We're talking about the country as a whole. Then the training that will be dependent on SADC GMI. I think they're starting to plan the program for the year. So hopefully that will be soon be communicated in terms of training opportunities that may result. But at this moment, there are no fixed program. We were obviously very much limited by COVID at this moment.
Yeah. There's a question, do you have an e-learning course for pump maintenance and solar technology?
Not specific to that, no. We haven't developed a specific course to that.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a question around technicians. What sort of activities or knowledge sharing, exchange of visits or trainings are you doing to ensure internal knowledge transfer between technicians?
Okay, so this comes back to the question of target audience. So this specific manual was developed for let's call it water supply managers or groundwater supply managers and decision makers at the level where the importance of operation and maintenance of groundwater infrastructures emphasized. So this manual is not specific to technicians level, although it can be customized for that purpose. But for example, like I've said, the Rural Water Supply Network has done a lot of work on these issues where they've developed specific training material. So within the context of the work that we've done is we've run training courses with groundwater supply managers or administrators, so to speak, in terms of the importance and understanding of the operation and maintenance of groundwater infrastructure, because their focus sometimes is very much on the groundwater resource itself and not on the infrastructure side of the resource.
Thank you. A question came in from Conrad. Where can we find details about your future trainings and events in SADC?
So that will basically come through SADC GMI, and I guess the best place is to watch the SADC GMI website, but it's normally well advertised through social media and so forth.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. A question on the cost of trainings. Is there a cost to attend the trainings for participants to attend?
So it depends. The training that we've done was basically, well, COVID made it free, made it online, and that is for free. Normally, participants to courses are supported through various mechanisms, but it just depends on you know, the given situation. But most of the time, I would say under normal circumstances, there are no costs involved.
Thank you. Another question we had from our side was, what steps could further cement the relationship between the regional river basin organizations and the Southern African Development Community national governments?
So this is an interesting question within the SADC GMI situation, and I don't work for SADC GMI, I'm a consultant to them. They are a SADC mandated institutions, and basically they are vested into different river basin organizations and supporting them in groundwater management aspects. So, for example, we would have I'll use Orascom as an example, where I'm now involved in developing the strategic action plan for the Stampin Groundwater Aquifer system. The Orascom has got a groundwater hydrology committee, and SADC GMI is basically supporting that groundwater hydrology committee with capacity and with knowledge, with studies, basically to enhance the knowledge of the basin.
Sorry, it sounds like you've done a number of trainings, both in person and now with the online trainings as well. What issues do you find that learners struggle with the most as you're doing this capacity strengthening and training?
So I think there's a couple of issues related to that. One is that normally training that takes place it takes place outside the person's workplace. So we normally come in, we deliver training, expecting that person to take up the training. Now, what we're focusing more now on and developing our kind of knowledge is to focus on what we call occupationally directed training. In order to develop training courses, we first need to understand what the work functions of the people or the persons are, and then you customize the training so that it fits into their work program. Because a lot of time we do training, we give it, but we've got no sense of how it's being implemented and how it relates to the work, to that person's work or day-to-day work functions. So that, to me, is a critical aspect that you need to understand and relate and customize your training to, and that it's needs-based, based on the requirements of a region, a country, a department, and that it's customized from that. So that's why I made a comment. We developed a training manual for a specific application. Taking it to another application is not a recipe book. You can take the best parts of it and customize it to your given situation.
Thank you, Kevin. For another question came in, for programs that support rural water services, but aren't able to operationalize a full O&M system, either due to time or resources, what components of the O&M circle that you mentioned in your slides would you recommend focusing on?
This is a very difficult question because it depends on the situation that you are in. So you need to understand your local decisions. Maybe there's already a community, what do you call it, a village committee in place. So if that is in place, then you would focus on a different element. But I think it's important to understand what the needs of an area, village, district, or community is, to kind of engage them in terms of what are the operation and maintenance requirements, and then basically customize your interventions to what I would call the priority intervention aspect. Sometimes we're trying to put in the perfect system in place, but sometimes we need to understand what is important levers in that cycle so that you can, I mean, if I can use the expression, get the best bang for your buck within that context. So you need to understand the local situation and customize it accordingly.
Good. Thank you, Kevin, so much for all of those answers. I'm going to hand it back to Jude now, as I know he has a few questions he'd love to discuss with you, and then we'll wrap up the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jude. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you very much for facilitating those questions. And thank you, Kevin, for that really interesting presentation. And thanks for handing over to me now. I'm as one of the hosts, I'm not able to put questions in the Q&A box, but I do have about 100 questions for Kevin. I'll keep it down to just one or two, if that's all right. Kevin, I'm fascinated by this training course, partly by the scope and ambition of it. As many of you will know, the SADC region is an enormous area. In fact, it's nearly exactly the same size as the entire United States, including Alaska, and it has a population that is roughly the same as well. And a large number of countries with different stages of development, different political economies, different languages, different cultures and traditions. Kevin, have you seen any kinds of differences in approaches to O&M or different philosophies about maintaining groundwater sources? Can you give us any comment at all on some of the kind of variation that you've seen in approach across the SADC area as you've done this work?
Jude, the honest answer, or the straight answer to that, operation and maintenance of groundwater infrastructure is very limited in most countries. To a large degree, it is an afterthought. Infrastructure gets established, people are expected to maintain it, and that's that. I think that some of the differences that I've seen across the region is the involvement of local government within operation and maintenance throughout the region. In some countries, you've got strong presence of local government. In some countries, you've got, for example, the national government providing the operation and maintenance support to all levels, and other countries support is non-existent. So it just depends on where you are, whether you're within a rural context, whether you're in an urban context also. So the kind of support varies quite a bit throughout the region.
Thanks very much, Kevin. And thank you once again for a really interesting presentation on a very important topic. As we all know, groundwater is a key part of water supply across the region, the SADC region, and in fact in sub-Saharan Africa more generally. And as you've correctly pointed out, O&M is a bit of an orphan child in the scheme. Often it's something that gets ignored. Your comment about pumps being installed and then left, they run until they fail, you know, in some ways makes my blood run cold. It's, as we all know, it's generally much cheaper in the long run to maintain and to put in an O&M system than it is just to keep replacing infrastructure. But the devil is in the details, as you've pointed out. So Kevin, thank you once again for a really interesting and excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Nicole, for fantastic facilitation of the Q&A. We'll be putting up some poll results, some polls on screen in a second. And we'd just like to get your feedback on this webinar, and I'd be really grateful if you would fill in, let us know your answers to the two polls. The first one is, do you think this training course is relevant to other projects and regions? And the second poll is, did you find the content of this webinar relevant to your work? And I'd be grateful if you take a moment to fill those in. They'd really help us in aligning this webinar series with the needs that are out there. Now, just to remind you, we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar and the webinar PowerPoint slides to everybody who registered for it, so you can expect that in your inbox fairly soon. We will also be sending a document with answers to all of your questions later this week, and we'll give Kevin a chance to review those, so that if there are questions that you didn't quite get the answer to, or that you'd like to know about, that will be coming up soon. As a reminder, there are 2 other webinars in this series that are coming up, and the dates of those are in the chat box. If you click on the link to our O&M webinar series in the chat box, or you go to the FSN network, you will see the dates coming up for those and the topics, and we're really excited about them. They explore other aspects of O&M. They will also be offered with simultaneous French translation. And I'd like to say thank you very much from the bottom of my heart to Zach, who has done a wonderful job of translation in this webinar. Please register for those. We'll be talking about Chris Hani District Municipality in South Africa. They have they've raised some very interesting questions about finance, sustainability of finance in operation and maintenance. We'll also be talking about the USAID BHA Nobodhatra Resilience Food Security Activity in Bangladesh in our final webinar. So please register for those. The links will be in the chat box, or you can go to our website. Just before we close, let me share the poll results with you. They've just come up. The first poll: do you think this training course is relevant to other projects and regions? Well, 94% of people said yes, it is relevant. So Kevin, that's huge encouragement there to the work that you and your team at SADC GMI have been doing on this work. And it seems that there is wide agreement that that could be rolled out much more widely to other projects in other regions. The second poll result: did you find the content of this webinar relevant to your work? Well, 68% of people said very relevant, another 26% said relevant, with only 6% saying a little relevant. And I'm impressed by that result. I think that it shows that even folks who aren't necessarily directly involved in O&M nevertheless found this interesting. Thank you all once again for attending. Thank you, Kevin, for the interesting presentation, and I'd like to bid you farewell today, but to remind you about the webinars coming up. See you there. Thank you all, and goodbye.